the barber's kindness and the miracle that followed. Mike sat in his small barbershop on Pine Street, staring at the modest earnings of the day, just $50. His shop was in desperate need of repairs. The paint was peeling from the walls. One of his 2 chairs had a broken footrest, and the mirror had faded with age. Bills piled up on the counter, including a fresh reminder from the electric company. Through the shop window, he watched people hurrying by. Many clutched folders, probably resumes, looking exhausted. The town's largest factory had shut down last month, leaving many without work. Mike sighed, recalling how tough it had been when he was job hunting himself. A fresh haircut could boost someone's confidence. But in hard times, even that became a luxury people couldn't afford. He reached for an old wooden sign, picked up a marker, and wrote, "Free haircuts for job seekers." When his sister, Sarah, saw the sign, she shook her head. "You can barely take care of yourself. Mike, how will you afford this?" Mike just smiled, though worry still lingered in his eyes. Sometimes, helping others is the best way to help yourself. The first clients. The next morning, even before he opened, 3 people stood outside his shop. The first was Tom, a middle-aged man whose shaggy hair showed he hadn't had a trim in months. He had an interview at a warehouse but couldn't afford a $20 haircut. After the cut, he looked at himself in the mirror, eyes welling up. "I actually feel like I have a shot now," he said, voice trembling. Mike patted his shoulder, wishing him luck. Word of Mike's kindness spread quickly through town. More and more people came in, each carrying their own burdens and hopes. Mike started opening his shop an hour earlier just to help as many job seekers as he could. Some of his regular customers, moved by his generosity, began leaving larger tips. The mysterious old man. One rainy morning, an elderly man walked in. He wore an old but well-kept coat. His gray hair needed a trim, and he held a worn folder, his resume tucked inside. "I have an interview tomorrow," the man said quietly. "I saw your sign. I hope it still applies." Mike nodded, guiding him to the chair. As he worked, he noticed the man's shoes, scuffed but carefully polished. His shirt was frayed at the collar but pressed neatly. This was someone who took pride in himself, despite his hardships. When Mike finished, the old man studied himself in the mirror. There was gratitude in his eyes, but also something else. Something Mike couldn't quite place. "How much do I owe you?" the man asked, reaching for his wallet. Mike shook his head with a kind smile. "It's free, just do your best at the interview." The man stood slowly, dusted off his coat, and thanked Mike one more time before stepping out into the rain. 3 months later, a life-changing surprise. 3 months passed, and Mike continued giving free haircuts, though he struggled to keep the shop running. One morning, he received a letter from his landlord. His rent was increasing next month. His hands trembled as he read the new amount. That afternoon, Sarah dropped by with some homemade sandwiches. "You need to think about yourself too, Mike," she said, watching him eat. "Maybe it's time to stop the free haircuts." Mike didn't answer. He hated the thought of stopping, but the numbers didn't lie. Just then, the shop door chimed. A man in a well-tailored suit stepped inside, smiling warmly. Mike squinted. There was something familiar about him. And then he realized, it was the elderly man from 3 months ago. But he looked completely different. His posture was confident, his eyes bright. "Do you remember me?" the man asked. Mike nodded slowly, still confused. The man reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on the counter. "Because of you, I got the job, but not just any job. I'm now the new owner of this building." Mike's mouth fell open. The man continued, "You helped me when I had nothing. Now, I want to return the favor. Your rent is covered for the next 5 years. And I want to invest in your shop, to help you make it everything you've dreamed of." Mike felt his throat tighten with emotion. He had never expected anything in return. Sarah, standing beside him, wiped away tears. Mike reached out and shook the man's hand, overwhelmed with gratitude. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. And that day, Mike realized, kindness always finds its way back. The barber's choice, a second chance at success. A young man sat in Mike's chair, nervously smoothing the edges of his resume while Mike worked on his haircut. He had a job interview at a local supermarket, and though his voice was steady, his fingers tapped restlessly against his knee. Mike focused on his work, but the weight of the rent letter in his pocket was impossible to ignore. The deadline loomed closer, and no miracle had arrived to save his struggling barbershop. He forced himself to push the thoughts away. Right now, this young man needed confidence. Then, the bell above the door chimed. Mike looked up, and his hands froze mid-snip. Standing in the doorway was the elderly man from 3 months ago. But this time, he looked entirely different. Gone was the worn-out coat and the weathered shoes. Instead, he wore a neat gray suit, and his eyes carried a new light, determined, purposeful. "I hoped you would still be here," the old man said, stepping inside. Mike quickly finished the young man's haircut, wished him luck, and turned his full attention to the visitor. "I got that job," the old man continued, his voice warm, "but that's not why I came back." He reached into his pocket and placed a business card on the counter. Mike picked it up and read the embossed letters. Robert Wilson. Wilson & Sons Manufacturing. Mike's head snapped up in surprise. Wilson & Sons was the biggest employer in the next town over. A well-established company. The realization hit him like a gust of wind. "The day I came in," Robert said, "I was testing something. I wanted to see how people treated someone who seemed to have nothing. And you showed true kindness." Mike's mind raced back to that rainy morning. He remembered the quiet way Robert had carried himself, the careful way he had spoken, the contrast between his worn clothes and his polished shoes. It all made sense now. Sarah, who had been sitting in the corner, her sandwich forgotten in her hands, stared at the scene unfolding before her. The shop, usually filled with the gentle hum of conversation and the snipping of scissors, was eerily silent. Robert continued. "Our company is opening a new factory here in town. With it, we'll need services for our workers, including a quality barbershop. I'd like to offer you a deal." Mike blinked, still trying to process everything. "We have a space in our new building," Robert explained. "It could be yours, rent-free for the first year. A proper shop, not this old place." Mike leaned against the counter, absorbing the words, feeling their weight. "But why me?" he asked, his voice quiet, uncertain. "There are bigger, fancier shops in town." Robert smiled. "Because you help people without expecting anything in return. That's rare, and my workers would be lucky to have someone like you." He placed both hands on the counter, as if solidifying his offer. "The space needs work, but we'll help with renovations and equipment. You'll have everything you need to run a successful shop, and you can keep your prices fair for working families." Sarah stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her brother's arm. "Mike," she whispered, "this could save you. The bills, the rent increase, you don't have to struggle anymore." Mike turned his gaze around the shop. The peeling paint, the broken chair, the old mirror that had reflected years of haircuts and conversations. This place had been his home for 5 years. It had seen his struggles, his sacrifices. Leaving it wasn't an easy decision. He exhaled deeply. "Can I think about it?" Robert nodded, his expression understanding. "Take 2 days. Call my office when you decide." He left his card on the counter and walked out. A new chapter. That night, long after closing, Mike sat alone in his shop. The silence felt heavier than usual. He thought about all the people he had helped, job seekers, struggling fathers, single mothers trying to make ends meet. If he moved to a bigger shop, he could help even more. He picked up Robert's business card and ran his fingers over the embossed letters. Sometimes, kindness did come back around, just not in the ways you expected. 2 months later, Mike stood in his new barbershop. The transformation was unbelievable. Bright walls, fresh paint, and 3 fully functional barber chairs. Large windows filled the space with natural light. Everything was brand new, but one thing hadn't changed: his mission. He kept his promise. Prices remained affordable for working families. And every Tuesday and Wednesday morning, he continued offering free haircuts to job seekers. Tom, one of his clients from months ago, now worked at the new factory. As he settled into Mike's chair for a trim, he chuckled. "Remember when I came in for that warehouse interview?" he asked, looking at Mike through the mirror. Mike grinned. "Yeah, you were nervous as hell." Tom laughed. "That haircut gave me the confidence I needed. Now I'm here, making good money." Mike hired 2 new barbers, training them personally. He made sure they understood his philosophy: kindness mattered more than quick profits. Sarah handled the shop's bookkeeping now. "Your bills are all paid on time," she told him one evening, going through the accounts, "and you're still helping people who need it." On one wall, Mike hung the old wooden sign from his first shop. "Free haircuts for job seekers." A reminder of where he started. Success meant nothing if you forgot to lift others along the way. Some habits were worth keeping, no matter how much things change. Did you like this story? Hit the like button and subscribe to Life Story for more. Tell us how this story made you feel in just one word in the comments.